love making classic, timeless designs that I can wear over and over again. Dolly blouse has quickly become my favorite as it pairs with everything I already have in my closet, allowing me to feel comfortable and stylish at the same time. Both neckline, dropped shoulders and relaxed fit paired with elastic balloon sleeves. All the details come together to create my wardrobe staple. I initially released this pattern as part of my sewing course for beginners, but ever since release I've been getting messages from more experienced sewists asking to release this pattern separately. In my sewing course I teach how to construct this blouse using just straight stitch and classic seam finishes such as French seam and bias binding. In this video I want to show a simplified construction method which will allow you to sew this blouse in just one afternoon. The blouse sewing pattern will be linked in the description box down below, and let's start sewing. So let's begin by preparing our pieces for sewing and attaching fusible interfacing. On front and back bodice pieces, at the neckline, add strap of bias cut interfacing on the wrong side of the fabric. This will give neckline structure and prevent it from stretching out. Also put interfacing on both facing details on wrong sides of the fabric and use very lightweight fusible interfacing. To start assembling, put front and back pieces right sides together and pinch shoulders and sides. Sew pieces together using a straight stitch, press open and knit in raw seam allowance in your preferred way. I want to share a technique how to properly press the seam open. So you want to begin by pressing the seam first flat from the wrong side of the garment. This will smoothen the seam and it will also eliminate any puckering or slight waviness that might happen. Next, you want to go ahead and fold the pieces. Again, we're pressing from the wrong side of the garment and open the seam. Then you want to go ahead and very gently put your iron down. You don't want to push it very hard, but just put it barely on top of the fabric and give it steam to lock it in place. Then you want to go ahead, lift the iron, move it further to the seam, put it down again, and again give it a little bit of steam to press it. Continue lifting iron, moving it, putting it down, lifting and moving, putting it down again. When you're pressing, avoid moving the iron while it's down and touching the fabric so that you don't stretch out the seam or create any wrinkles. Finish pressing from the right side of the garment. Here you want to barely touch the fabric and again give it a little bit of steam to lock everything in place. It's important to not touch the fabric too hard to avoid giving it shine or over pressing. Using this pressing technique, you will always press your seams beautifully and create that professional look. Moving on with our blouse assembling. Now take sleeve, fold it in half, right sides together and sew. Press seam open and knit in raw seam allowance. Repeat with the second sleeve. For the balloon sleeves, knit in raw seam allowance of the sleeve bottom. Fold 1.5 centimeters of the seam allowance towards inside and stitch around, leaving about 2 centimeters gap at the bottom to feed the elastic. Using bodkin or safety pin, feed elastic through the funnel. Stitch both ends of elastic together, creating a strong bond. Finish by closing the opening with a straight stitch. Put sleeve into the bodice, right sides together, pin and sew around the armhole. If you want to perfectly match the seam here where the seams meet at the armhole, here's what you want to do. First, you want to go ahead and mark seam allowance on the bodice and the sleeve bottom. Then take pin and put it right through the seam middle at seam allowance line. Put a second layer of the fabric and make sure you're pulling out the pin through the second layer again at exactly the center of seam correction and seam allowance crossover. When you're sewing on sewing machine, stop a few stitches before the pin. Then using hand wheel, slowly rotate the hand wheel and move the needle to sew through the pin. Once you went past the pin, take it out and continue sewing. This method will give you always perfectly matched seam. Put facing details right sides together and sew at shoulder lines and press open. Now pin facing into the bodice matching shoulders and neckline centers together. Sew around the neckline. Finish by doing understitching. Push all seam allowance towards the facing side and sew around the neckline 1 mm from the seam line on the facing side. Understitching will keep the facing in the inside of the garment and will help shape the neckline more beautifully. Once you finish doing understitching, trim seam allowance and press the neckline. For the final part, knit and draw seam allowance of the hem, fold towards inside and sew around the hem. This stitch is a top stitch, meaning that it will be visible from the garment outside. This is why you want to avoid using back stitches at the beginning and end of the seam. Instead, leave long thread tails at the beginning and end of the seam. Once you sew the seam, take hand sewing needle and push long thread tails towards garment inside. Tie knots, trim excess threads, and you have created a seamless beginning and end of the seam. Give your blouse a final press and it's finished. Dolly blouse has become a staple in the wardrobe and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I do. The pattern is linked below in the description box. Thank you for watching today and I will see you next time. Bye!